Hello, this is Hamlet from the Guild Elitist Jerks on the server Mal'Ganis, narrating a gold challenge mode run of Gate of the Setting Sun. So straight away here, we're going to charge all the way down the opening bridge and pull all the trash before the first boss. You can choose to do this in one pull or two. Two is just fine for time purposes, but one is also quite doable and probably more representative of the sort of trash pulling you're going to have to do in the harder challenge modes. Here in the opening hallway, we have demolishers who put down the bombs, infiltrators who lay down smoke bombs, and sappers who sabotage people, jumping on their back and stunning them. I used Icebound Fortitude running up here. I don't remember if that prevents it. In general, whether you're doing this in one pack or two, you're going to want to clump everyone on the tank to avoid any smoke bomb related problems. There's nothing in this hallway that cleaves. As usual with a big trash pack, once we had them clumped up, we used our AoE timers, Leg Sweep and Remorseless Winter, and then started having to watch out for the heavy damage from whatever mobs were left. I put Iron Bark on the tank. It turns out I could have used Tree Form too. The other bad trash pack is just about 3 minutes away. I move into the room a little bit to try to find some space once the infiltrator's down and there are no more smoke bombs. The boss doesn't really proc aggro, so you can pretty safely stand here and just watch for bombs. I took a nick there, and then the next two are dropped right on me, so it was very inconvenient. Right as we're finishing the pack, someone who's standing in the door manages to pull the boss. That was definitely not good. Fortunately, it's a pretty easy boss, so we recover without too much trouble. I just res the person who pulled and get everyone stabilized again, and then pretty quickly I go back to my usual routine of just DPSing on this boss. You could use a Bloodlust here. 11.5 minutes left means we'd have it back up around the second half of the final boss, so you can make that choice based on what time is on the clock when you usually are pulling this guy and whether you want to have it for the first or second phase of the final boss. Remember that this guy blows up all the bombs in the room at 70% and 30%. Otherwise, as long as people with sabotage are careful, there's not that much damage going out, and I find this a great time to DPS with Heart of the Wild. If you watch the tank HP, I'm probably a little more comfortable than I should be, but even still, you can spend a lot of time DPSing. When the fight ends, you want to be ready to exit through the north door of the room. You can safely run through the bomb pile in the door once it starts fading out, but just be careful because anyone who has the sabotage debuff left over on them will still explode. As a healer, I find it a good time to wait by the exit door and then steal a few seconds of drinking the moment that this boss ends. As I've mentioned before, Restorative Amber from the Klaxi vendor is an excellent item to have handy for any challenge mode activities that you do. So I drink up a bit here and then try to follow closely behind the group. You'll see I wind up getting there just in time as the group starts taking damage from this pack that hops over the wall. It has 3 infiltrators and a wind shaper. The 3 smoke bombs mean you always want to stand right on top of the tank. It helps to have a raid mark on him. The wind shaper casts Gale Force, which is a strong hurricane type spell that always has to be interrupted anytime you see one throughout this zone. Once you're down to just infiltrators, you can try to start dragging them forwards, but if they keep putting down smoke bombs and that's a hassle to DPS, it's probably faster to just stand still, finish them, and then charge down the bridge to the next pack. The next pack is one that you're going to want to have a plan for. It's in the tower after the shaky bridge. It has infiltrators, a wind shaper, and 2 ragers, which are big cleaving melee mobs. It's the only place in the zone where you have to try to deal with ragers in a pack that also has an infiltrator putting down smoke bombs, so it's a bit tricky to find a position where you can heal people without also having everyone get cleaved down. If you time your jumps while going over this bridge, you can avoid the stuns. Here we use Army to help control the pack. He starts channeling it right after a stun so it doesn't get interrupted. I use Tree for some extra healing. Army is a bit sketchy on this pull because it makes the cleaving Rager spin around more, but overall it really helps mitigate the incoming damage. And as long as you have an interrupt on the Wind Shaper and get the Infiltrator down quickly, then you can spread back out and just have to deal with 2 Ragers, and you can aim their cleaves in a safe direction. The Ragers still do a lot of melee damage while they're enraged, so here it probably would have been a little more efficient to have me or the Hunter use a GCD here or there to keep that off them while we were finishing them off. But here we just drop them and then move on. In this zone, there's leeway to skip only 2 mobs and still meet the enemy requirements. That's also why there's no point using an invisibility potion here. The easiest 2 to skip are in this 3 pull coming up right before the elevator. Because mobs can't follow you onto the elevator, you can just kill one of them, CC the others, and then run onto it and ride up to the second boss. Even a soft CC like a Roots works, anything that lets you just kill one easily without being bothered by the others and then leave them behind while we head onto the elevator. Have one person in the group who's in charge of making sure he sees 5 people on the elevator and then pushing the lever. It's kind of a pain if you have to reset because you started the elevator early. One issue with that pack is that since we did have to kill a mob in it before he's seeing the others, we're stuck in combat going up the elevator. I don't know if there's any reliable way to get a drink off here. It shouldn't be that big of a problem because there hasn't been much to heal since the first boss, and we're going to get a free refill after this boss. This boss has one thing that healers have to watch out for, which is pray time. Make sure you have that debuff visible on your frames. He grabs one person in the party, it won't be you or the tank, and does 400,000 damage to them over 5 seconds, and also stuns them for the duration so they can't use defensive cooldowns. If the target was at full HP, it's not actually that bad. You just have to get one heal into them during the 5 seconds, basically. But people aren't always topped off due to the acid pool, so you just want to make sure you keep whatever handy instance you have off cooldown. Like here, I don't really use Swift Mend on the tank. The only other thing of note that this boss does is occasionally cast Impaling Strike, which is a spike for 50% of the tank's HP. As long as you keep him safe so you don't have to worry about him while you're dealing with prey time, there isn't too much of a problem. He does the strafing run at 70% and 30% HP. He'll prey time after each one of those and then on a cooldown after that, if he even is on the ground that long before the next one. Your DPS should be focusing on him full time whenever he's in range and not flying around. Do make sure you have a positioning plan for where the group goes during every strafing run so that people don't get split up. The width of the fire he lays down is longer than healer range, so you can lose someone just by having them stuck away from the group. If people are good about acid pools, there's actually very little else to heal at this fight. With high DPS here, the only 2 prey times I got over the course of the fight were the ones that came after each strafing run. As this fight's drawing to a close, you want to make sure your group has a plan for who's going to immediately ride down the elevator and charge down the bridge to start the cutscene and who's going to man the 2 cannons. We're going to have our Death Knight go downstairs here because he's an engineer and can get across the bridge quickly. I like to stay up top since it's completely free drinking time while we wait for all of that to happen after this fight ends. It looks like we were in combat with this guy for almost 2 minutes. It can be a bit hard to speed it up because of all the time he spends out of range of everyone, although maybe with some careful positioning you could keep some better DPS uptime. Here the fight ends and I immediately start drinking, although really there was no reason to hurry. It takes ample time for him to ride the elevator down and get all the way across the bridge to move on with the zone. We're going to trigger the cutscene at just about 5:50, so that might be a useful time benchmark, and we do finish this with some time to spare. Gate of the Setting Sun is arguably the easiest challenge mode, but compared to the other easy one, Skullomance, it's a little tighter on time. Here's the cutscene. Hopefully you have good load times. Some people get a bug where when they try to cancel a cinematic, their mouse cursor disappears. I think clicking both your mouse buttons at the same time is the fix for that, but I can't remember for sure since it's been a while since I've had that bug. The 2 final trash packs in the zone are both 2 Ragers and a Wind Shaper. There you can see the group taking some extra damage because the interrupt on the Wind Shaper was slow. Otherwise, 2 consecutive packs of 2 Ragers can actually drain your mana a good bit. As I mentioned before, it probably would have been more efficient to have the Hunter tranquilize the Enrage, or to remember to do it myself, although it can be a bit tricky while you're healing. You probably don't want to pull the second pack here until the Ragers and the first one are just about dead. Even if you do blow a whole mana bar healing through 2 pairs of Enraged Ragers, just take a second to use an Amber while the tank moves up and pulls the 3rd boss. There are other ways to mitigate their damage, like rooting them, but really I think if we just remember to take the trouble to dispel off that Enrage, then there would not have been much of a problem at all. I would not recommend chain pulling the 3rd boss in while you still have some trash. The 3rd boss is generally easy, but he has a sort of subtle DPS race mechanic. There's an ad called the Saboteur that comes about 45 seconds into the fight, and before that ad comes he's very, very easy. There's little damage to heal, and you can spend most of your time DPSing. You generally want to have a plan for where your tank is going to move the commander over the course of your fight so that your melee DPS knows where to go without losing DPS time, and also so that you and the tank know how you're going to get the small swarmers onto him every time they come and jump over that wall. In this case I'm healing with a monk tank, so it's not that hard for him to pick him up from pretty much anywhere. Otherwise, we'd probably want to reverse the positions and have the tank over here on the near side of the bridge, and then I would always position so that the mobs are running through him on the way to me. Something to know while healing this fight is that there's no reason not to stand in the green stuff. It doesn't do any damage, it just reduces your damage output, so while you're healing you can stand in it happily if it makes your positioning easier. Here I'm not because I'm actually spending most of my time DPSing. So there's the Saboteur that arrives, and we've got the boss down to 23%. When the Saboteur arrives, he starts periodically tossing a bomb that AoEs the whole raid unavoidably, so if he's only alive long enough to toss it twice, it is completely insignificant, and I just continue DPSing to finish out the fight. But if you're slower on this fight, then you have to put up with him for longer, and you have to start healing that off the whole raid. We ended the fight on the far side of the bridge, which would be slightly inefficient. If you're refining a plan for this boss, that would be something to keep in mind. Heading towards the final boss, we once again meet the 2 mobs that we left alive before. Since we're again about to jump off a cliff to a place where they can't follow us, we just use a simple CC on them and then leave them behind. Try to be careful not to take a hit from them as you go by because you're about to take some fall damage jumping down. Also be careful if you have a movement speed increase. It can be easy to overshoot that little wooden beam and then die from fall damage. You can pull the final boss as soon as the two people who are riding up in the artillery first are ready. Bloodlust them immediately before they take off and then pull and shoot them up. You want to plan in advance which two DPS have the best timers to stack with the Bloodlust while they're up there on the first rotation. Then the second time around, the third DPS will swap in for one of them to use his timers. Down here, there's not too much going on. The only interesting feature of this Protectorate pack is that when one of them hits 20%, they all get a big DPS buff. So there I just knock them away from the tank, and then by the time they get back to him, there are only 4 left, and there's nothing threatening going on. After they're all down, I actually don't have very much to do. When the second pack of ads spawns, the 3 that fly around in the air and drop tornadoes on the group, I can kind of try to pick at them a little from the ground, but I have a hunter down here with me anyway who's probably going to kill them just fine on his own. So at this point we're just watching the DPS. Ideally you'd get the weak spot down sometime soon after the second headbutt. Maybe with really good coordination you could actually get it down right before then, but as long as it's low when the third DPS cycle starts, then you can try to finish it off before the third type of ad spawns, the one that casts Screeching Swarm. As I mentioned back at the beginning, something to decide for this zone is whether you use your Bloodlust at the beginning to try to get the weak spot down, or save it for the end of the fight, which might also mean that you will be able to use it on the first boss and then have it back up in time. Here it seems like we're doing okay. We have it at 20% when the second headbutt happens. I thought we might be able to get it down before the third ad spawns, but you'll see it comes out just before the weak spot is done. This third ad, the Swarmbringer, puts a dot on people that absorbs some healing, and also if it runs its full duration, it spawns a new mob that runs around doing damage to people, so it generally causes a bit of extra chaos. You can have range issues cleansing it if everyone is running around in different directions during the fixate phase. In general, something we could have put a little more effort into here if we needed to was coming up with a more organized positioning for this phase. It can be a bit of a pain if you never have range on people, and also if DPS starts to lose uptime on the boss based on which directions people kite him. Once you get him to his last phase, the fight should end so quickly that it doesn't matter too much if things are a bit hectic like they are here, but it would probably just make it more efficient for DPS purposes if you were more organized about your positioning. But here we are finishing him off with just about 40 seconds to spare, which is not a bad cushion at all for a pretty short zone. So as always, tell me what you thought of